I feel like Wodapalooza snuck up on me a little bit. It's usually a little earlier in January. They moved it a bit back this year, and I feel like that sort of threw me off, and all of a sudden I looked at the calendar and I'm like, Wodapalooza preview, we gotta do this. So here we are, trying to get a little bit psyched for Wodapalooza because I just sort of wasn't thinking about it. If you're like me, watch this, because I'm gonna talk you into why we should be excited about Wodapalooza. And if you've watched my videos before, if you're new here, make sure you subscribe and like this video. But if you've been here before, you know that in general, I keep things pretty optimistic when I can. I try to be realistic too. But Wodapalooza is usually a fun competition, not usually the competition that I would say is necessarily the most well-rounded or the competition that you look at to be like, that's the fittest person on earth. But it's a fun weekend. Vibes are usually pretty high. This year's gonna be a little bit different because they have a new location, so that'll be cool to see and how that changes things a little bit. I actually competed at Wodapalooza in like the scale division several years ago, and even then, several years ago, it was super crowded, and I've heard it's only gotten busier and crazier, and there's just not enough space at the old location. So happy to see them moving it. I think that there can be exciting things. I'm really excited for this rain sandbox, that they're gonna have some of the competitions in the sand. I think that could actually impact who does well and who adapts to that well, and the performances we see and who ends up on the podium. So I think there's gonna be some interesting things to pay attention to, and it'll be a fun weekend. I think it's always a fun weekend. Like I said, fun, not necessarily the picture of this person's the fittest, but fun. Also, as I've delved deeper into all of this, it's a really stacked field, especially on the individual women's side. The teams of three, it's also very, very stacked. The men's side, there are some incredible athletes, but I wouldn't say it runs as deep as the women's field does this year. So if you also haven't been paying attention the last couple years to Wodapalooza and you want to this year, they do things a little bit differently now. Thursday, Friday are individuals, and then Saturday, Sunday are teams for the elites, teams of three, same sex. So that means you have a lot of athletes doing both. Long competition weekend, but you get to see a lot of these athletes for a long time competing, and it's fun. Like, I think those teams of three, well, the people at the top definitely want to win and take home the money and have that title. I think it is more of a fun competition for most of them, as opposed to like, this is our championship. So it's cool to see, it's fun to watch. You're not gonna necessarily see all the top names at the top, especially in the team competition, but it's always fun to see the names and to see people taking things a little bit lighter compared to other competitions we have throughout the year. Like, of course, the games, Rogue, semifinals, all of those are like laser focused. This is like a party. And I also think we may be seeing a lot of people, because I think some people signed up for Wodapalooza because they either are unsure what they're going to do over the CrossFit season, or they're not competing in HQ's CrossFit games and they're doing other CrossFit type competitions like a Wodapalooza, like Dubai, things like that. So I think we do have some of that. I think we're seeing some of that with some of the names that got pulled into Wodapalooza this year. So on the individual side, we have 6 events. Again, it's only a 2-day competition. That's fairly short when you think about it compared to most other competitions we see for individual athletes. Even semifinals and regionals in the past, the ones that had 6 events, were over 3 days, not over 2. It's a lot packed into a short amount of time. One of those events is a lifting complex, which is sometimes difficult to have because it's a little bit biased. Like, it biases specific athletes in an event that isn't super long. But lifting is a component of CrossFit. It doesn't really bother me that they have it, but there is some arguments that it is an unfair skew towards that one element of CrossFit because it is 1/6 of the score, just a weightlifting component. That could factor into who we see at the top, but I think a lot of the best are competitive enough on the lifts that while they may not win the lift, they won't need to over the course of the weekend to win the event. So we'll start with the men, and I'm just gonna give you my top 3 and then a couple guys to watch. I am going to put Ricky Garard in that top position. I think that he wants to repeat again and win Wodapalooza. I think that he was probably a little bit disappointed with his CrossFit Games finish because he had twisted his ankle. And he just moved over to Proven. He's got a lot of big things going on, and this is an opportunity to come out and be like, hey, this is what I've been working on in the off season. These are the moves I'm making, and I'm going to maintain my title at Wodapalooza. So I would definitely keep my eyes on Ricky, although he has a very good challenger this year in Jeff Adler, who hasn't competed at Wodapalooza the last few years, but is competing this year. Again, like I said, these are some of the people who I am unsure are competing in the CrossFit Games season, and it appears they may be racking up other competitions in case they make a decision not to compete in the game season. So we are seeing Jeff, who usually is a fairly focused athlete on the CrossFit Games, doing Wodapalooza again this year. Some people are picking him to win. Fair pick. I think though, this is when I talk about that element of having some of the events in the sand, having some athletes have to adjust to something they're not used to. I don't think that Jeff Adler is the best at that. I also don't think he's the worst, but I don't think he's the best at adapting on the fly. So that could impact if we see him on the top or just somewhere else on the podium. So I have him in second. And in third, I actually have actually sounds like a weird thing to say here when I'm about to follow it up with what I'm about to say. I have your reigning fittest man on earth, James Sprague. Sprague is a very specific type of athlete, but I think he's working on filling a lot of his holes. And I also think that he's still pretty strong at the things that he's very good at. So I think we're gonna see James be able to come out and possibly win that event with all the box step-ups and the running in the sand. I think he's gonna have some things he can hit out of the park. And if he can just maintain on some of the areas that he's not as strong, like that lift, I think he has a real chance of ending up on the podium or very, very close to it. So I have him in third. The person I don't have on the podium on the men's side, who you would expect on the podium, is Pat Vellner. I think he'll be right outside of the podium. I haven't loved what I've seen from Vellner the last couple competitions he's went to. Now, there are some reasons for why he didn't perform well at the games. I mean, we know. And then at Rogue, I believe he wasn't feeling well. So there are definitely components to why he may have not done well in the last couple competitions and why he could smash this one if all the things are dialed in. But he's also in the end part of his career, just by age, I'm assuming, and sort of what he's talked about. And I just think that some of these other guys are surpassing him to a degree that Pat may not be on the podium at Wodapalooza this year. But I like Pat Vellner, and I would love to see him prove me wrong. But I'm gonna put him outside of the podium. A couple other guys I think could have solid finishes, or people maybe we should watch. Guy Malheiros, I think that this event might work well for him. The fact that it's a shorter event, that we do have that lift where he might be able to just demolish the field on that. I think those are things that can help him have a pretty strong finish here, actually. Luka Dukic, I've been very impressed by him recently. He did very well at Dubai, winning it, and he's been putting in a lot of work. And I'm excited to see how that pays off at Wodapalooza. But the reason I don't have him on my podium is because we haven't seen that work, seen what he's improved upon in a field as deep as we have at Wodapalooza just yet. So I'm gonna keep him off the podium, but I definitely will be watching him and expect to see him in the top heat. A couple other people, Moritz Fiebig, always someone to watch. Travis Mayer, he's another athlete that's sort of in his twilight, but still definitely has, a little bit of a tiger in him and is ready to fight. Saxon Panchek is another athlete that I think you always gotta keep your eyes on at any competition. Any Panchek, really. If there's a Panchek, keep your eye on them. And one more person I want to mention who could, I feel like, have a real either way overperform or underperform, and that is Austin Hatfield. I feel like Austin Hatfield does better the longer the competitions go. We saw him do pretty well at the games with a 10th place finish, which was very impressive, but he started out slow. Because Wodapalooza is such a short competition, there's not room to start out slow. Kinda gotta be able to come out of the gates blazing. And I just don't know if he'll be able to do that. Although I do believe someone picked him to win the whole thing. I definitely think he can surprise us. Could be a surprise podium contender. I would be very, very surprised if he won. But you know, I like being surprised. Over on the women's side, I am going to do something a little bit odd. And that's because the obvious winner in this field is Laura Horvath. Like, duh, I don't know what else she is just, we talk about certain people being in a league of their own. Tia is obviously, she's in a league of her own, like up here, off camera, just way, way up there. But Laura's also sort of in a league of her own. Maybe Gabby Magala was closing in on her. She's injured currently, so, you know, that's gonna have to take a pause. But Laura is also ahead of a lot of the athletes, just very fit, has a very strong mental game, and she's won the games, she's won Rogue. She could win this competition too, not all in the same year because she didn't win the games this year and she didn't win Rogue this year, but she has won those two competitions, or two major ones, and now she's coming to Wodapalooza. So I think the obvious choice is her to win, but I'm not gonna pick her to win, even though I made all those arguments. Why? Mostly just because everyone's picking her to win, and I just want to do something a little bit different. So I am not going to, even though I do believe she's going to win. You know, it doesn't have to make sense. So in first place, I'm going to put Alexis Raptis. I think that Alexis is sort of in a place where she's been dialing in, getting focused. She hasn't been doing a lot of competitions, like she didn't do Rogue. So she's a little bit, possibly a little bit fresher than some of the athletes that did all of that. She had some time to take off, to decompress after the games, and then to zone back in. And I think that Alexis has possibly fewer opportunities to compete because she does have her colitis issue that she deals with and can't always travel to some of the farther competitions that might mess up her system and her ability to compete at her best. So these competitions that are still in the US, a little bit easier to get to, these are the ones that I think she has to probably zone in on a little bit more compared to the other competitions that are like Dubai, right? So I think that this is a great opportunity for her to do well. I think some of the events are very good for her as well. So I think that we could very well see Alexis Raptis on the podium and very possibly see her in that top position if Laura doesn't win. But it is possible. I think it's more possible that Alexis Raptis could beat Laura than if Tia was in the field, because then it would just be Tia. So I have Laura Horvath in second. I don't think I have to explain why I think that she can podium. I think I've pretty much explained why I think she's very likely to win, but I'm not picking her. Second. Laura Horvath is second. And then in third, I have Ariel Lowen. I am just always impressed by Ariel. I don't understand how she just continues to get better. And she's not like the youngest athlete. She's a mom, so she has all those responsibilities. She primarily works out alone in her garage. Not sure if you know that, but yes, she is a garage athlete. And she's just gotten insanely good and has continued to get very good. And she seems to have a solid mental game as well. And that might be because she has things in perspective, right? Like having a kid, having a life outside of CrossFit can really put things in perspective in a different way. And that may help her just be a better athlete. And she's been a really, really great athlete in the past couple years. So Ariel Lowen, I'm putting her in my third place position. A couple other athletes that I think we should keep our eyes on and that can do really well. There are a lot of them. The women's field has a lot of games athletes and a lot of nearly games athletes, so it's almost overwhelming. I can name a lot of people, but I'll give you a couple. Brooke Wells, I think, could end up on the podium as well. She'll be right up there. Emily Rolfe was on the podium at the games this past year. I think this event's good for her too. Emma Tall, she's someone I'm not sure if she'll be doing the actual CrossFit Games season. So this could be a really big competition for her. And that can change your mentality going into it versus some of the people who may be doing this more as a fun weekend in Miami. Although I think they all want to win, especially on the individual side. I think there's a lot more focus on the individual side on performance, where I think some of the teams are more fun teams. But the athletes who may not be planning on competing at the CrossFit Games, they may have a little bit of a different focus and aggression going into this competition compared to those who are just doing this as the beginning of their season. Just some thoughts. Some more names. Abby Domit, I think she's definitely someone we should watch. Erica Folo has been on the rise, almost qualified for the games last year. I think she's another athlete we can watch. Annika Greer is another one like Erica Folo, who's just on the outside looking in. At the game season last year, that's another person who might do really well here. Kyra Milligan, sort of a similar athlete to Annika, but I think she'll be another one who could do well at some of these events. And one more person I think we got to keep our eyes on is Lucy Campbell. I don't know what we're going to see from Lucy. She's coming back after a wrist injury, and I don't know where she is in her training or in her mental game after coming back from a major injury that made her take time off. But I think there's a chance she can definitely be a top half of the field athlete. She would have been prior to her injury. So someone else who's sort of coming back that might be worth watching. And last year at this competition, someone coming back, Emma Carey, was the person who won it. She's not competing this year, and she's not competing in CrossFit anymore, but it is a competition where sometimes people make moves. So Saturday and Sunday, we have the teams. And we're just gonna touch on the teams a little bit too. There is so much competing at Wodapalooza that there's just so much to talk about. And there are so many teams, and we can't go over them all. But we'll again talk about some of the top teams that I think will do really well. I'm actually gonna pick a team in my first place for the men that I don't think is the one that most people are picking, and I'll give you my reasoning. So I'm gonna pick Team GoWod as my top podium finisher. And that is Justin Medeiros, Dallin Pepper, and Willie George. I will tell you the team that I think most people are picking and explain why I agree with that pick as well. But why I'm going to pick this team is because no one on this team is competing in the individuals. So they're gonna be much fresher than a lot of the other teams. I think because they're not competing in the individuals, they're more focused on this team event. Justin Medeiros is a multi-time CrossFit Games winner. Even though he hasn't won the last few years, he does have that history. Dallin Pepper has been on the podium. Those are some legit athletes, and they are just focused on this team competition. And I know part of the reason that Dallin and Jason Hopper aren't on a team this year is because they want to try and podium, and it just wasn't working out together. So this may be it. In second, I'm going to put PJs, and that team is the one that I feel like most people are picking to win. And based on the people on the team, I get it. You've got Patrick Vellner, multiple-time podium games athlete, Jeffrey Adler, games winner, and Jason Hopper. So you have some pretty legitimate CrossFit Games athletes there. So I get it. But Pat and Jeff are competing earlier in the weekend. Could be a little bit beat up. And the other team is gonna be fresh. And they're both very good, very stacked teams. Arguably, PJ's a little bit more, but are gonna be a little bit more fatigued. So I'm going with Team GoWod in my first place position. And in fourth, I'm gonna go with a team that has done well a whole bunch, and that is the boys with Noah Olson, Travis Mayer, and Chandler Smith. Both Noah and Chandler are just doing the team competition. Noah's podiumed at Wodapalooza a whole bunch, so he's got a lot of experience in this arena. Well, not this one, because this is a new one, but you know what I mean. In this competition, and I think that they're gonna get that final podium position. Let's go over to the women. I'm gonna start out picking a team that I think, again, is just going to be fresher than a lot of the other teams, and that is a huge reason why I am putting them as the first place team. Because there are so many very, very good teams, it is hard to pick who is going to be the best one. And I do think doing that competition the day before makes a difference. So I'm gonna do the Yeti Outcasts, and that is Emma Lawson, podium athlete, Shelby Neal. I think she's still like up and coming. She hasn't peaked yet. We haven't seen the best Shelby Neal or Emma Lawson, who's also very young, but I think Shelby is sort of on her way up. And then Danielle Brandon, who has finished just off the podium at the CrossFit Games a couple times. I think that's a solid team. And I think they have some different skill sets that may come together to take that top place. In second, I have a team that I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce, and I'm not really familiar with this company. It is Relight Salt Bays, maybe? That's Abby Domit, Ariel Lowen, and Emily Rolfe. Again, really strong athletes. Emily Rolfe has been on the podium at the Games. Ariel Lowen has been on the podium at the Games. Abby Domit is an athlete sort of like Shelby Neal on her way up. But this team is going to be a little bit more fatigued than the team I just mentioned because all of these women are competing in individual. But I think they're all incredibly fit and still have a real shot at making that podium, and I have them in my second place team. My third place team is possibly a little bit of an odd pick, but I think that they may have the connection required on a team to do pretty well. And that is the Broadway girls. That's gonna be Haley Adams, Brooke Wells, and Sydney Wells. I think Brooke and Sydney, even though they are twins and very similar, I do think they have some different strengths and some similar strengths. And then I think Haley Adams has some very different strengths from those two girls. And I think that could possibly all pair together to be a really solid team and take that final position on the podium. But there are a lot of fun teams here. If you look at the names of the people on these teams, there are just so many. And even speaking of the women, there's the daughters, which will be interesting. So you'll have Annie Thor's daughter, Katrin David's daughter, and Sarah Sigmund's daughter. So cool to see all of them. They're also all kind of like from a different time. Annie, I would say, is the most competitive still, but she's also recovering from having a baby. So, you know, it'll be fun to see them though. It will be fun. And a lot of these teams are like that. It'll be fun. So that's the overall vibe I would use to describe the Wodapalooza competition. It is fun, and I hope it'll be a fun weekend to watch. I will definitely have a wrap-up video. One more thing I want to point people to watch coming up very soon, this, not really weekend, Thursday. Thursday they're going to have Reps Ahead. I think that's going to be an exciting matchup. I've been watching some of the Reps Ahead, and I think it's a really cool format. It's something different, and at first I wasn't 100% on board, but the more I've watched it, the better they've got at presenting it. I think that it's a lot of fun and another cool way for athletes to be spotlighted, for us to be able to watch something fun, and for them to do a little competition that's still very competitive, but doesn't impact the athletes in a major way. Like, it's not like something that's going to be like, well, I'm doing Reps Ahead. Can I do a competition in 2 weeks? Yeah, probably, because the workouts are fairly short. Sometimes very short, depending on what happens, because you kind of knock people out by getting a certain number of reps ahead. It'll be fun. Let me tell you who's competing. So your headliners are Emma Lawson and Alex Kazan, and Dallin Pepper and Jason Hopper are your male headliners. And there's some other cool undercards, I guess you call them, maybe, that are gonna be fun as well. Definitely something to check out. Big weekend, lots of stuff. I'll have a wrap-up video, so that's something to come here and watch on Monday if you're looking to see what happened, if you didn't get to catch it all, because I will be watching hopefully the vast majority of it. So come here to get more content. Subscribe, like I said earlier, like this video. Appreciate you all for watching. Carson, say goodbye. Bye. Bye.